And once again, it's an issue of ownership. It's an issue of political decision, political will that belongs to the government itself, and it is afterward that IOM can come in by the technical way, bringing what we know. But you are absolutely right. I think we have to work with them and to accompany them. From now to Copenhagen, I think that the time is very, very short. If I talked to the Minister of Namibia before we begin this meeting, there is some, in Africa, there is some meetings, and previewed meetings at the technical level before Copenhagen. I hope that they will come up with not one voice, because 53 countries in Africa cannot be the same voice, and in particular on migration and environment issues. There is a part of Africa that is in the sub-Saharan Africa between the Maghreb and the rest, where 22 or 23 countries are absolutely facing a dramatic problem of desertification, soil erosion, and so on and so forth. Those cannot have the same attitude that the others, where you have raining season, you know, quite long raining season. You can make grow whatever you want, and to address the food needs and so on and so forth. It is not the case in the Sahel region, Sahel and Sahara region. The raining season is shorter. When we were more young, it was from May, end of May to October. Now the raining season is between August and October, and there is, of course, the quantity of water is much more. But all these things come at the same time and bring a lot of disorder in the rural area, even in the urban areas. Yeah.
I'd like to get a sense of the scale of these migration issues that we're discussing. There's some very large and scary numbers flying around about the scale, hundreds of millions of people in the next few decades as will be climate migrants.
2050, they will be 200 million persons.
So that's what the IOM reckons. Yeah. Does everyone agree with that, or is that a kind of doom mongers figure?
I don't think anyone can really make a good estimate of how many people are going to be moved, but I suspect that the figure that Ndura has just given is a very conservative figure. And I think that this is really one of the key issues that we've got to begin to discuss. At a time when just across the border in a neighboring country, one of the political messages is that you will get rid of 25,000 so-called unofficial, undocumented migrants per year. We're facing a situation when we're talking about maybe 200 to 300 million people. Now, here I think is really the crux of this problem. We're talking about human rights, we're talking about migration law, we're talking about adaptation processes, regarding one of the biggest forced migrations that history has ever seen, just at a time when every country in the world is busy putting up legal barriers, and in some cases physical barriers. In India, for example, barriers are being put up now. Barbed wire barriers are being put up against what is assumed will be Bangladeshi climate refugees. Forgive me for using that term, Craig. But I think that we have to begin to understand that all of this is happening just at a time when everyone is against refugees and displaced people.
So thanks, Mr. Carvalho. If 200 million is a conservative figure, can we try and unpick that a little bit? How many of them are going to be in the kind of camp that Craig Johnstone would be dealing with, responding to emergencies, you know, floods, cyclones, unexpected events? How many of them are due to the sort of drip of the Sahel, desertification, salination of the soil? How many are going to end up within their own national borders? How many are actually going to be a cross-border issue, like the India-Bangladesh thing that Mr. Carvalho just mentioned? Can we try and break that down a little bit? Is that a valid and useful thing to do at the moment? Because 200 million just taken as a whole is scary and almost, you don't know where to begin with it almost.
Yeah, I think the answer to the question is probably no. That is to say, it's probably not a useful thing to do at the moment. That is, the data stream that arrives at a number of 200 million is, I think, extraordinarily weak. I would say 200 million plus or minus 100 million is probably a better estimate, and even that I would hesitate to say was a very good estimate of what we have. But it's going to be serious, no matter how you cut it. If 200 is conservative, 200 is beyond the capabilities of the world to handle currently. So an awful lot of work needs to go into that. Into the issue of how will they be generated? Will this be a more evolutionary process where people gradually end up realizing that they can't live where they have been living and they begin to move away? Will that be how it happens? I think inevitably that will be how some people will handle it. On the other hand, my experience with respect to storms, for example, be they in the United States or anywhere in the world, is that people are very reticent to leave their homes, even in absolutely clear circumstances where they should not leave, where they should not stay where they are. And we have that phenomenon all along the eastern border of the United States. I mean, along the coastal regions, there are people whose towns will be wiped out the next time a hurricane hits. They know it. They have paid for expensive houses to build there, and they go right ahead and do it anyway. Every time we have a river flood, people go back and rebuild in the floodplain again. And I suspect that will be true globally. That is to say, it takes a lot to force people to move, and therefore we will have disasters where there will be people who will be forced to move in circumstances that will not be the more evolutionary, more organized way along the way. What is the division within the fictional number of 200? Then what is the fictional division of that number? I think we need to be prepared, each of us, for doing what it is that we do best. IOM is a migration agency that I think is very well suited to handle a lot of the adaptation issues that are necessary, and to the extent that they can manage that adaptation together, I would say, because I echo your point with respect to the developmental community, that they need to be much more actively involved in this process. Anything that can be done to prevent the disaster should be done, but there will be disasters, and I suspect that some substantial portion of that 200 million will end up moving in circumstances that will be dire.
Yeah.
And we need to be prepared for that.
I think 200 million are figures, published by IOM in our last policy briefing in May 2009, and it is an official figures, done by our researchers in IOM. But I think that this figure is only related to normal displaced person, not irregular migrants, not people, getting out of any framework of accountability on migration issues. I think we have to be just careful to know that these figures is address the issue of those who migrate, those who are displaced, and those who have the risk to be displaced from now to 2050.
I'm Dr. Hassan Mahmood, the State Minister for Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh. Indeed, I differ with the number of the environmental migrants, that by 2050, the number of environmental migrants will be 200 million. In Bangladesh, in case of Bangladesh alone, if sea level is risen by 1 meter, we don't know when that will be the case. It could be within the next 40 years, it could be within the next 80 years. So if that is the case, if sea level is rising for 1 meter, then if the population of Bangladesh is not increased, but definitely population of Bangladesh will be increased.
Yeah,
and the prediction is by 2050, the number of population in Bangladesh will be 250 million. Now it is 150 million. If the population remains the same by 2050, what should not be the case, alone in Bangladesh, environmentally displaced people, environmental refugees will be 30 million. So how, if the case in Bangladesh alone 30 million, so the number of environmental refugees will be much more higher than the figure.